We will be discussing how cyber criminals could be fooling you with social engineering. Casey will be presenting today. He is a technology strategist and IT consultant here at Biz Technology Solutions. Casey, you can take the floor.
Thank you so very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay. And thank you everybody for joining. We are using a new platform this time. So in the past we had used Cisco WebEx. We are now using Microsoft Teams and their new live event feature, which does kind of let us get a little more feedback from you guys with the chat thing on the side. So yeah, if you do have any questions during the presentation, feel free to post them there. We'll definitely go through them at the end of it. All right, so let's get started. So today we're going to talk about social engineering. Obviously, it's a big thing these days. So we'll go through a few variations of social engineering that we usually see. I am Casey Cook, so I'm a technology strategist and IT consultant at Biz Technology Solutions. I've been with Biz Tech for over 6.5 years and been in IT for over 10 years. I have a master's degree in IT management and then various certifications in cloud, cybersecurity, and project management. So even though we're talking about social engineering, I do kind of want to run through just kind of the current state of cybersecurity as we see it, discuss malware a little bit, and just kind of explain the terms and the variations that you can see, and then run through some threats and vulnerabilities currently, and then I'll dive into the actual versions of social engineering that we usually see. And then at the very end too, I kind of want to run through some security tools that might be able to help you guys, whether it be personally or in your business, and then we'll have a little Q&A at the end. All right, so let's get started. So if you have ever been through one of the trainings that I do for our clients before, I do usually like to include some fun facts at the beginning. So first fun fact that I'm going to include here is how many Americans are still on dial-up internet today? I guarantee you it's probably a lot more than you realize. So from a pure number standpoint, and the information might be slightly outdated by a year or so, but the answer is actually over 9 million people. And this is just in the US as well. Obviously, there's less than 50% of the people in the world that don't have access to internet. But of those that are in the US, there's still over 9 million people on dial-up. AOL being kind of the leader still, with about 2.1 million people every year that are using dial-up. But then there's still other providers out there like Earthlink, NetZero, Juno, and People PC, which when you think about it is kind of hilarious because I'm sure many people that are younger cannot even begin to make the noise of a dial-up modem. All right, so let's look at cybersecurity by the numbers. Between 2015 and 2018, the United States was the #1 target. I'm sure they still are one of the most prime targets. The cost of a breach in the US was close to $8 million. And that's just kind of the average cost of everything involved. So you have to think, not only is it like the ransom that you'd have to pay if you got infected with ransomware, but it's also like, okay, we have to pay remediation fees to restore from backup. You're going to implement new softwares and hardware to kind of protect yourself in the future. And all said and done, you're looking at close to $8 million. Atlanta was a big difference because they lost access to a lot of their systems. If you didn't hear about that breach, I'll go through it here in a minute. But they've paid close to 20 million, I believe, at this point, and they're still kind of working to get back. And then identifying a breach. So in 2018, the average amount of time it took to identify a breach was 196 days. So you think about it, if somebody gains access to your environment, they could literally just sit there for 200 days before somebody actually noticed. And I think of Marriott too, who we just recently found out that they had been breached back in 2014 or 2015. So it's been 5 years that somebody's just been sitting there and siphoning data out of their environment. And small businesses have been a very big target. So almost 50% of the time, they were the target of these cybersecurity incidents. In the ransomware itself, I saw a stat that said that they are targeting small businesses about 70% of the time with ransomware. So again, it's the small businesses that don't have the budget to invest in cybersecurity and why they are such a big target. So I want to show you guys a little timeline to run through, some of the incidences that we had seen through 2018 and then beginning of 2019 here. So MyFitnessPal being a big one. That's an app that you can use on your smartphone to where you can track the food and calories that you take in and everything. It's owned by Under Armour. They found that an unauthorized party had gained access to the data with their user accounts being email, usernames, passwords. There's about 150 usernames and passwords that were leaked in the breach. And again, when we talk about data leaks, it's a big deal because most of the times, people are using the same roughly like 5 passwords or so for all the various sites. So what these attackers will do, or hackers, they'll take that information that they find on those sites. They'll go to kind of the more popular ones like, Gmail and Google and Amazon and Netflix and try to log in with those credentials and hopefully get lucky. So that's why they tried to use that information. I kind of briefly touched on City of Atlanta. So they did an audit in January 18 and found a ton of vulnerabilities in their network. And unfortunately, shortly thereafter, they received a ransom of $51,000 in Bitcoin. They did not pay the ransom and ran out of time to pay it. So they basically lost access to all their data. Ultimately, they've paid close to 20 million. It says 17 here. And this included losing 30 years of like dash cam footage for the police department, losing 10 years worth of like documents and stuff with the city attorneys, and just like people weren't able to pay their water bills for months. I mean, it was just a very big breach. And that was in March. So moving on to April, Panera Bread had a security breach, and somebody had actually found a vulnerability on their website. And it wasn't until a few months later that they actually kind of found out, okay, this is a big deal. They initially claimed that it was only 10,000 users that got affected, that had their data leaked. But then, they found out it was actually more like 37 million people that had their information get leaked. Then next is Exactus. So it's a marketing and data aggregation firm. And what they do is kind of collect information on businesses and just, personal people. And they had 2 terabytes of data on everyone that they kind of stored in their own database. And it was basically, you didn't need to authenticate to get access to it. So obviously, you couldn't just type in google.com and search it. But if you knew the URL to get to that database, you could just plug it into the browser and it would take you directly there. You didn't have to do anything to log into it, which again, who knows how many people got access to that data. Ticketfly was another one. So there was a hacker who actually told a Ticketfly, like, hey, you have this vulnerability. They kind of just, pushed it off like, not a big deal, we're not going to worry about it. He took it upon himself then to actually debrand their website and did, who knows what to it, and then was able to make off with the 27 million user records that were in their database. Then in November, this was a big one that we heard about with Marriott. They had discovered a breach that had happened, back in 2014, so 5 years later almost. And hackers were able to harvest, names and credit card details, even passport numbers, travel information. So again, they were able to tell, like, when these people are coming and going and stealing passports and stuff. That's how they can sell that information on the dark web and make a decent amount of money, I'm sure. And then 2019, we found a database called Collection Number 1. So this really was just kind of a spreadsheet that was being shared across sites that had 772 million records on it. So again, I'm sure of that 772, a lot of them might have been from these other breaches that we're discussing here. But again, they kind of aggregated them down to one spreadsheet, and then they were selling this spreadsheet online on the dark web for only $45. So again, that's a ton of information for that price. And since then too, I know that they've had collection 2 and 3 that have been leaked as well. So it's a ton of information that's available out there now. So, we're talking about selling all this stuff on the dark web. How much does it actually net these people? And so a surprising amount. So $1,200 for all your personal information. If you look here, we can see like online shopping being a big one with Amazon and eBay accounts. They can sell those for about $165. Personal finance is definitely the best one. So they're selling, your credit cards and bank information and PayPal login information for about $710. Fortunately, your dating profile doesn't pull a whole lot. You're only getting about $9 for that on the dark web. And so, we always talk about the dark web, and I feel like it's not always explained very well. So I just kind of want to touch on that as well. So, when we say the dark web, we're actually referring to a part of the internet that was not really meant for bad. We always hear that you can buy guns and drugs and everything on there. It was actually intended for good, for privacy. But because it was anonymous and private, those people kind of took advantage of it. So we talk about the World Wide Web, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg here. And these are all the sites that you can access from your computer. So, you go to Google Chrome or Firefox and you type in google.com. That's taking you to a website that is kind of in the World Wide Web, or the ClearNet that we call it. And then anything you search from there, you'll be able to see those sites in the World Wide Web. The deep web is referring to any database or server that kind of sits one layer behind the internet. So again, you think of like maybe Facebook. When you go to Facebook and log in, it's a site that's on the World Wide Web. But then once you send it your credentials, it is reaching into the dark web to all of Facebook's other servers and pulling forward that information that's stored there. So again, they're not internet accessible, but they're only one layer removed. And then the dark web, again, is the one that's very anonymous, and you can't get to these with like Google Chrome or Firefox. Most times you're going to use a browser called Tor, and most of the sites all end in onion, so .onion. And then again, there's no like Google search for the dark web. You actually have to know the site that you're going to, the URL for it. You can't just go and search some information and it gives you a whole bunch of results. And like I mentioned, the dark was never really meant for bad. And you can see here that a lot of the information is just kind of like file sharing. There is leaked data that's shared now, which not a big deal. But I hear I feel like buying guns and drugs and everything are always a big deal, when really they're just a very, very small percentage of what's done on the dark web. So let's talk about malware. I'm sure you've heard this word, and virus and worm and Trojan and all these different terms. Malware is just kind of a high-level term. So it's referring to any sort of malicious software that was created for the intent of harming a computer system or network. And then everything is kind of sits below that. So we talk about virus or Trojan. A virus is just kind of a piece of code that tries to spread itself inside of your computer. Trojan referring back to the Trojan War, where they had this big horse and they kind of disguised it to look like something as a gift and then just snuck in. That's Trojan is referring to something to where it's meant to look like either a recognizable program or something that is trustworthy, and then you install it on your system and it's actually got a virus behind it and tries to spread itself. Ransomware, I'm sure you've heard of, is a very big one where it actually tries to infect your system and encrypt all your data so that you can't access it, and then just kind of creates a bunch of just scrambled letters so your computer has no idea what it's doing with that data. Cryptojacking is still kind of a fairly new term. I'm sure a lot of people haven't heard of this, and I'll go into more detail on this in ransomware in a little bit. Cryptojacking is just kind of a form of malware that uses your computer's resources to mine cryptocurrency for attacker or hacker. And then spyware is really just kind of a something that sits on your PC or tries to infect your PC and then steal your activity or information from your computer. A big one is something like a keylogger, to where if I'm able to infect your system with a keylogger, anytime you press a key on the keyboard, it's going to type that into a text file that's hidden in some hidden directory on your computer. And if the hacker has access to it, he can kind of pull that information later. And why that's a big deal is because if I see that you type bankofamerica.com, and then I see your a username or email address, I can assume anything after that's going to be your password, and then I'll just use that information to go log in and be able to see your account. So that's a very big deal as well. So talking about cryptojacking, they kind of call it the new gold rush because it requires very minimal skills. You actually buy a cryptojacking kit on the dark web for about $30. And the reason it's become so popular lately, it's actually overtaken ransomware in the US, is because it's a lot more efficient. If somebody's infected with ransomware, there's no guarantee that the hacker will get paid, because you may not pay the ransom, you'll just restore from backup. Where with cryptojacking, if I can infect your computer, I know that I'm going to get at least some return out of that. And you can see the picture here, there's just kind of like 4 lines of code. So this is actually JavaScript code, and it's actually a script that gets tied into a vulnerable website. So if you visit that website, it installs this thing called CoinHive, or some sort of miner on your computer. Then it uses your computer's CPU and RAM to mine cryptocurrencies for that attacker. And I'll give you a kind of brief overview of how that works. So you can see here we have the threat actor. They find a vulnerable website that a lot of people visit, and they'll kind of upload those 4 lines of code. And then whenever those people visit that site, it's going to load this cryptocurrency mining software on their computer, and then it's going to use their resources. And again, it's not stealing information or stealing your information, so a lot of people don't see it as big of a deal as ransomware, because it's not infecting anything really, but it is using your computer's resources. And so why should you care about that? Well, first of all, it's still accessing your computer, which is kind of a privacy thing. But second is it's increasing your energy bill. So we generally like to think, with a server, you're probably paying about $1,000 a year in just power or electricity alone. With a desktop, it's more like $400. Obviously, if it's a very powerful machine, then it'd probably be a little bit more than that. But when that CPU is running at 100%, it's definitely going to increase that energy bill. Over time, it's going to cause the machine to slow down or even cause lag on the internet because it's using those resources that you're trying to use too. And then it may cause the computer to crash if it doesn't enough, and then it could lead to eventual damage of those components over a period of time. There is actually a version out there that runs on Android phones, and it actually causes the phone to physically melt. This is just kind of a fake picture, but you can get the idea. What happened was, because the CPU and RAM on the phone were running so hot and running at such high intensity, it caused the battery to expand, which caused the other components to basically get hot too and just fried the inside of the phone. So basically made it unusable. So it's definitely a big deal if it causes damage like that. Again, ransomware is still very prevalent. This is one that encrypts your files on the PC and network. It tries to spread itself across the network and infect everything it can. It'll scramble the file names and extensions, so your computer, again, doesn't really understand what to do with them, and it requires a key to unlock those files. Most of the time, they're going to request payment in Bitcoins, and the ransom payment usually has a sort of time limit, and I have a screenshot of what that kind of looks like here in a minute. But then again, you can kind of see the flow of how this works. So whether it be an email, email phishing is kind of the big one that we get infected most times. It infects your computer and then tries to spread itself by using other vulnerabilities across the network to other machines. And the WannaCry was a big one in 2017, and that made use of an exploit called Eternal Blue and gain access to every Windows machine it could reach. Here's a little picture of a few that we had seen. So you can see here with this is WannaCry over here. You can see it kind of gives you a time limit of 3 days to before the payment will be raised. You see down here they're asking for $300 of Bitcoin to be sent to this address. So you can think of this as kind of like an account number that you're sending it to. Bitcoin is fairly anonymous, so trying to track down who this account was tied to would be very hard. Especially if it's in a country that has no extradition. The FBI, CIA is not really going to do a whole lot. And then you look here, after 7 days, they're going to say that your files will just be lost entirely. So this is kind of what happened with the city of Atlanta, where they didn't pay in time and just lost access all completely. So then we'll just touch briefly on some of the current threats and vulnerabilities. So again, we talked about cryptojacking and ransomware. Email phishing, I'll kind of talk about that more here when we go over through the social engineering terms. But it's still kind of the main way of spreading the ransomware and viruses and everything. We see Internet of Things becoming kind of a big deal. That's just because we're kind of bordering between this line of security and convenience to where we want to be as convenient as possible, but we're getting pushed all these products, whether it be Alexa or anything that's connected to the internet that's not fully vetted from a security standpoint. So we're putting all these things in our houses, which is leading to like security cameras that people are accessing from foreign countries. I heard of one, a Nest camera that somebody was using as a baby monitor, and they actually heard a man breathing over the camera, which is kind of alarming. And then there's things too where now our cars are connected to the internet. And there was a study done by the University of Stanford where they were able to take control of a Jeep through like a cellular network. So they took control of a Jeep basically by using Verizon's towers. We're able to actually control it and make it like slow and stop and everything. So it's kind of crazy with everything being connected, how scary it can be. And then fileless malware is becoming a big thing just because with all the new antiviruses and firewalls and everything, it's hard to bypass those. But what fileless malware is doing is it's actually hard to detect by these antiviruses because they're using tools that are built into the Windows operating system. So something like PowerShell, which is kind of a command line tool that's inside of Windows, they're exploiting that so that Windows isn't going to shut down itself because it sees like, oh, we're trying to run a PowerShell script. This isn't a big deal. So it's kind of hard to pick up on if you are infected with a fileless malware. And then third-party breaches. So there is no real silver bullet to security. You can't be 100% secure, especially in our internet connected world. But third-party breaches is just saying that no matter how security conscious you are, there's no guarantee that your neighbor is going to be as cautious as you. We look at like Target, who was attacked in 2014. They had a whole bunch of like credit card information that was stolen from their point of sales or the POS systems, and the way that was done was through their HVAC provider. So they use a third party for HVAC, and somebody gained access probably through email phishing campaign. to one of the engineers' accounts. And from there, they were able to connect to the HVAC system and then connect through the network to the POS systems and pull all that credit card information. So again, you just have to be cautious of who you're letting gain access to your systems or to your data. All right, so now let's dive into the various ways of social engineering. The ones I want to talk about are baiting, phishing, quid pro quo, which I'll explain a little bit more about what that is in a little bit. Vishing, which again is just kind of phishing but over the phone, and then Wi-Fi honeypots. So to start, we'll look at baiting. So baiting is very similar in ways to phishing, but it's really just saying like, hey, if we're being offered something, like when you go fishing, I'm not going to put, my favorite piece of pizza or something on there. I'm going to put what that person wants, right, or what that fish wants on a worm. So with baiting, what they're doing is trying to put out there something that people want, in hopes that they will click on it or open that file. We see this is kind of a big deal with like peer-to-peer file sharing networks. So BitTorrent is one of those, and they say like of all the files that are available out there on BitTorrent, about 20 to 30% of them probably have some sort of a virus that's attached to them or some sort of spyware attached to them. So again, if you're trying to download the new like Captain Marvel movie or something that came out a couple weeks ago, if it's out there available, chances are it's probably not real. So trying to open that is going to just infect your PC. And this also doesn't have to be online. You could use something like a flash drive. So we've seen this where when companies are targeted from a security standpoint, what people will do is they'll take these flash drives and load them up with a virus or some keylogger, and put like a sticker or something on there that just says like financial information 2019 or W-2 forms or something that will kind of draw their interest. That would get them to plug it in and see what's on there. And then the second they plug it in and open it up, then bam, they're infected. So you just have to be very careful of any USB drives you find laying around. Be careful before you plug them in. And then also the files that you're downloading online. Just be very, very cautious. So what to watch for with baiting? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So again, if there's an offer out there for the new CD from whoever, just be careful before you download it and start trying to listen to it. Make sure that you're using secured and verified websites and services. So again, in your browser, whether it be Chrome, Firefox, in the top left corner of the address bar, there's usually going to be a little lock there, and it'll also say HTTPS, which is saying that it's encrypted. So that's a good thing to be watchful for. And then look for random requests to sign in. And what I mean by that is if, let's say you're using your computer and you plug in a flash drive or something, all of a sudden you keep getting like a large amount of like being asked for new credentials or to log into like Outlook or to Gmail or something, which you've already been logged in and been using it. It could be that it's actually somebody trying to push that alert to you and collect your information. So to avoid baiting, again, I would just kind of not use peer-to-peer services like BitTorrent or Usenet, or at least be very, very cautious and make sure that you're scanning those files before you open them. And then don't pick up random flash drives. That's a good point. All right, phishing is still the most common form of social engineering that we see. And it used to be that these people would just kind of create these emails and just spam them out to as many people as possible. But studies have shown that about 1 in 12 million people actually click on these links or those emails when they find them. So that's why we see now that they're actually trying to target people. They call it spear phishing. So what they're doing is they're going online to LinkedIn and they're pulling information about the controller. Let's see who works at the CFO is, who works in like accounts payable, maybe the CEO, and then they'll pretend to be one of those users and email the other person requesting a wire transfer or requesting some form of payment or information. So you just have to be very, very careful. Some of the tips that we like to look for with phishing emails or spotting phishing emails. So number one, is it requesting money? A lot of the times, we're not going to send money over via email, so just be very, very cautious when they're asking for that. We see a lot where they're asking for gift cards as well for some form of money laundering, I'm sure. And then always check the email address. So this is one of the main points I want to drive home. Always make sure you look at the email address. So in this example that I have here, you can see that this is from one of our clients who was the controller in the company. She received an email asking about doing a wire transfer, and come to find out, when you're on your phone or maybe if on your desktop, if you're using like Outlook or something, a lot of the times it'll say the display name, but it won't show the actual email address. It requires you to either click like a drop down or something to where it will show both the display name and email address. But again, the reason for that is, like my email, my personal Gmail, I could change it, my display name to say like Donald Trump or something. but that doesn't mean that obviously I'm not Donald Trump, but I would actually have to click to show like, hey, even though the display name says Donald Trump, the email address is still gmail.com. I don't think that's who it is. So just be very cautious and always look for that one for sure. Another one to be mindful of is improper copyrights. So again, with our internet connected world, I can go online and do a Google image search for the Netflix logo. I can probably craft a very kind of convincing looking email or even a fake website in a matter of minutes using just the internet search. And a lot of times what we'll see is in emails, at least, that these criminals are adding like copyrights to the bottom of them just to make them look more official. I can tell you I've reviewed a lot of emails from Apple and Amazon and Netflix and have not found one that actually has a copyright in it. So again, always just kind of like look for those, and it should be a red flag if you do see it. Another tip to watch for is bad grammar. So again, most of the time, these people are going to be from a country that doesn't speak English natively. So whether it be like Russia or Asia, somewhere over there, a lot of times they're just going to use some form of like Google Translate or Microsoft Translate to take their language and change it into English. So there's going to be some weird language and maybe some weird formatting in the email. A lot of times too, they're going to use threatening and urgent words. So it'd be like, if you don't update your credit card info, your account will be suspended or blocked. These words that usually try to draw a rise out of us so that we will click on something without really thinking about it. Most times they're also going to lack information. Again, they don't want to say too much and like kind of give themselves away as being fake. So they're going to try to provide as little information as possible. And then on the opposite side, if it's a legitimate email, you're usually going to find where they provide a ton of information just because, hey, they're trying to draw your attention to it as well. And then they also request a lot of times personal information. So we've seen it where they'll ask for payment information or what's your credit card number, blah, blah, blah. You can see here where it's giving us an invoice in this example and requesting that we pay this invoice. So it's whether it's requiring bank information to pay that or not, just always be mindful before you email anybody personal information. And again, double check the email address. All right, so another tip to watch for, and also a very popular one, is fake hyperlinks. So always double check the hyperlink. Do not click on them. And if you have an email that you believe to be phishing, we ask that you don't forward them because when you do it, you're actually just kind of keeping that link alive. So just be very, very careful. You can see with this one where it says HTTPS and it's taking us to woodgrovebank.com, but then when we hover the mouse over it, it's actually changing that link to HTTP and it's taking us to this random IP address. So in this instance, if I do use Woodgrove Bank as my banking institution, I would actually go to woodgrovebank.com and log in. A lot of times if I do need to update some form of information, there's going to be a notification there like saying that, hey, you need to update your address or something. And obviously if I don't do my banking with them, I don't have any reason clicking on that link, so I would just delete it. All right, so next I want to show you kind of how email phishing works. And this is going to run just kind of a quick video of a program called GoFish, which is something that's freely available on the internet. So again, if somebody with a couple hours of time, they could go on YouTube and learn how to set the server up and actually start their own phishing campaign. So it's not hard and it's actually very, very easy. It's kind of scary, so I'm just going to show you guys what to be watchful for here. So you can see here you get a LinkedIn request to connect. Immediately we should be drawn to this where it says it's not secure and it's also got this random IP address right here. So this obviously is just a fake LinkedIn website that somebody had created. And then once he gets signed in here, you'll be able to see that the LinkedIn connection email that he received, there's no notification of that. And it's actually taken us to the LinkedIn site now. But if we move over to the actual hacker's machine, this is the GoFish software I talked about. You can actually see here where the email, it shows it's been sent to that user. They open the email, they click the link, and they actually submitted data. Actually, we'll show you here the email address and password that was used to log in. And yeah, it's just kind of crazy how easy that is. So you just have to be very, very careful. Make sure, again, look at the links and look at the email. So with phishing, again, always double check the email address. Look for disguised links in the email. Again, don't forward them, just kind of hover over them. If you have questions about it, you can always ask somebody else to come over and look at it. But again, 9 times out of 10, if you have no reason to be looking at the email. I would just delete it anyways. Don't click on attachments unless it's something you're expecting. And if you still have questions, again, you could always contact the user that sent it to you. If it's a vendor you use, you could always, just call them up and be like, hey, did you mean to send this to me? Always be watchful of threatening or urgent requests, trying to use scare tactics to get you to click on stuff. And then again, we usually see requests for some sort of money, gift card, or wire transfer. And again, they're going to see poor grammar too, because they're from these foreign countries. And to avoid it, training is a very big thing, because end users are always going to be the weakest link. So it's always a good thing to not do training just at least once a year, but you can always do training again. So we use a tool internally that does a phishing simulation. So once a week, we actually send out fake phishing emails to users to try and train them on what to look for. If they do click it, then they get enrolled in a sort of like video training class to, again, kind of like get them up to speed on what to be watchful for. So it's something very useful to use, and it's definitely helped our business and stopping people from clicking on these emails. Then you could also use some sort of advanced email scanning tool. And what this does is, anytime that you send or receive an email, if it has a link in it or an attachment, something like Microsoft ATP or Advanced Threat Protection, what it does is it'll actually scan that link or scan that attachment to see, does it contain a virus? Does this link take me to a malicious site before it actually puts that email into your inbox to where you can see it. Next, we can talk about quid pro quo. So again, this is really just kind of saying a favor for a favor. So this is, an instance where, one of the big ones we see is if somebody calls a business and says, hey, I'm with IT support. We saw that you had a virus on your computer. Could you get me logged into your machine and, let's take a look. We'll get it fixed up. And obviously, like, because this person is offering to help us out, like, oh yeah, definitely. And we'd let them into the computer. We actually had an instance of this happen with one of our clients. Thankfully, we had an engineer on site, and he was able to talk to that person, like, oh yeah, I'm working with IT now. They're logged into my machine. He's like, no, I'm right here. Like, there's no reason that they should be logged in. And tried to take control of the mouse, and the person on the other end that was remoted in was actually trying to fight him for it. We ended up ultimately having to turn the computer off completely and then boot it back up. So again, be very, very careful of people offering free advice or free support. It's kind of one of the main reasons things we see. And there's actually a study done too in 2016 at the University of Luxembourg, where they had people passing by and they would have them sit down and talk to them about cybersecurity. Like, what are your thoughts on it? And then they would ask for their password. And as a variable in the study, they tried to offer them, something. I think it was a piece of chocolate, and they would offer it to them before, at the very beginning, at the very end, and then like right before they asked for the password. They found out that if I offer you a piece of chocolate right before I ask for your password, 50% of the participants were willing to actually tell them. Which that's, again, human nature. We're trying to be helpful, and because somebody offered us something, like, hey, well, I'll help you out in return. So you just have to be very, very careful. This is something not only salespeople use, but also these cyber criminals. So what to be watchful for here is IT support people that you're not familiar with, especially if you are a client of BizTech. If you talk to an engineer that you're not used to, we usually try to have at least 3 or 4 engineers that work with a specific client. If it's somebody that's not in that circle, I would always question it. Feel free to call back in and, hey, does this person actually work for you? And then look for a lack of detail too. So if they don't have a lot of information, like, if I just call up and say I'm IT support, I'm like, all right, well, what company IT support do you work with? They might not have that info. And again, if it is an IT request, there's always going to be an IT ticket usually with the ticketing system, so you could just ask them for that. And don't give out just information that IT should know. So if it's passwords or IP addresses or software use, a lot of that information can be used against you if they're trying to hack into your system. So just be careful, because that's stuff that an IT company should know if they're working with you. And then obviously don't exchange your password for candy, like we found in the study there. Next, we're going to talk about phishing. So this, again, is the same as phishing, except for through email. It's using a voice or over the phone. And this is very easy to do, because people nowadays can spoof the caller ID on a phone to make it say anything, or make it look like a 1-800 number or a number from a vendor that you're used to seeing. And we found that they target accounting and human resources a lot, just because, again, they have access to the most information and to the financials. So what to watch for in this is, unexpected or strange calls that don't really follow the normal procedures. So if somebody calls you up asking for like a wire transfer for an invoice that you had found, you usually you're gonna have some process in place to where, like, we receive the invoice, it goes to this person, and then it gets funneled here, and then gets approved, and then it gets paid. If they're trying to skip through that process, then I would always be cautious of that, and be suspicious of any callers requesting information such as wire transfer. I heard a story recently of a girl who does physical penetration testing, meaning that businesses hire her to try and gain access to the building and then get access to their computer network. And she, created this fake web page, created a fake email for like an architecting firm. She called up the office and pretended to be somebody like, hey, I'm going to have an interior designer come to your office tomorrow. And the secretary or whoever she was talking to said, this doesn't follow normal procedure. They usually give us 2 weeks notice. And again, playing on human empathy, she says, oh, I'm sorry, like I'm 7 months pregnant and you haven't been sleeping well. I have all these issues. And then again, that secretary has empathy for her. She's like, oh, I'm really sorry. Just give me the information you need and we'll take care of it. And sure enough, she let her in, and she was actually the one that showed up the next day pretending to be an interior designer and took control of her network and showed that it's not really the secretary's fault. It's more like she should have these processes in place that she's supposed to follow and not kind of go around them. So how to avoid this is always be watchful for these fake calls. Always ask for as much detail as possible, and then verify that there aren't processes in place to prevent those from being ignored. And then again, when in doubt, you can always call the company and just to verify. So if you're on the phone with somebody claiming to be IT support, like we talked about, always you can always hang up and call back in and be like, hey, I was on the phone with Dave, and he said that he was trying to help me with my computer issue. And that way you can at least verify, like, hey, this person was there. And if he has no idea about it, obviously it was fake. All right, next let's look at Wi-Fi honeypots. So a honeypot is a term that's used in a lot of different things. In this instance, what we're talking about is an attacker who creates this, uses a wireless access point and creates a fake network based around a popular Wi-Fi name. So again, if you think of like Starbucks, for instance, every Starbucks has free Wi-Fi. Most of them are using the same name. So whether I go to the one here in Charlotte or go to the one in California, they're all going to have the same Wi-Fi name usually. And what our phones usually will do is if it knows that name, it tries to connect to that network. So we just click yes, and it joins right away. So what these attackers do is they'll create a fake access point with that same name, hoping that you will join it, and then they can just steal information from you. So again, if it's usually free and open Wi-Fi, you're going to connect to it anyways, and you're not really expecting to have to enter a password. So they just take advantage of that situation. In this instance, this is a site called wigle.net, so wigle.net. And Spectrum being a big company here in Charlotte, I just searched TWC Wi-Fi, and you can see all the purple dots on here are actually access points that have that TWC Wi-Fi SSID. So again, if I'm connected to 5 of these, if I get close to a 6th one, it'll probably just automatically join, but there's no telling that that's actually owned by Time Warner. So again, you just have to be very careful with what you're doing. Always be watchful for captive portals. And we see this with like hotels and everything. Usually when you connect to a Wi-Fi, it's going to ask you like, hey, here's our terms and conditions. Press this button and enter your email to accept them. So just be careful. Always watch for those. That just is going to mean that it is an actual access point. If it connects automatically and it doesn't require anything, I would be a little careful. If you see slow internet speeds, it's usually because there might be an attacker that's just spying on your traffic. So just be very cautious of that. If you're trying to avoid it, I would just keep Wi-Fi turned off unless you're actually trying to use it. Make sure that you're joining only good known networks. And if you have questions or concerns about one, I would just ask an employee at like Starbucks or whatever it is that you're trying to join. And then to be very, very safe, you could always use a VPN or a virtual private network. And what that does is it, instead of connecting directly to that access point, it's reaching through that access point to another network and creating sort of an encrypted tunnel, so that way no one can spy on the traffic that you're sending back and forth through the internet. So that's it as far as social engineering, but I do want to offer up some tools that are going to provide you some reasonable security. And these are things, again, whether you use them in your business or personally, they should be able to help you at least. Number one being patching. So patching is a big deal. Usually when a patch is released, it means that there is a vulnerability there and you should be updating it as soon as possible. We see this like with Windows updates, usually with servers, because you have to do a computer restart. A lot of times they try to schedule those, but on a desktop machine, I would try to update it, often as possible. And you can have it set up to automatically install these updates. And same with Mac OS down there at their bottom. You can actually have it install updates right away. That way you're actually making sure that you stay secure. And this is probably one of the most important habits that you can get into to staying safe. Another one to look at is your internet browser. So not all internet browsers are created equal. I'm a big advocate for Google Chrome or Firefox because they're kind of the more popular ones, and they do try to focus on security and privacy. Microsoft Edge is not a bad option. Microsoft right now is actually trying to recreate Microsoft Edge to be more like a Google Chrome. And then the other one there is Apple's Safari browser, which still not a bad option. But again, I would try to push for the other two there. Personally, I use Firefox, but I also use DuckDuckGo as a search engine. And the reason for this is, trying to be kind of like privacy conscious. Google does collect a ton of information on you, and then it sells that to marketers and advertisers. So again, if you're not as concerned about privacy, that's not a big deal. It's just, to me, it seems like a big deal because Google's collecting your name, gender, birth date, your personal cell phone numbers, recent Google searches and YouTube searches because they own YouTube, and even tracking like where you live and work when you're using Google Maps or Waze, because Waze is also owned by Google. They're recording that information and just kind of keeping it in your account. The biggest thing is a lot of times they're selling that information to other people, and should that account be breached, who is going to get access to this information? So I'm a big fan of trying to be as private as possible, and DuckDuckGo is one of those search engines that doesn't track your computer usage. Next, we're going to talk about some browser add-ons and extensions. So these are just kind of add-ons that you can put into Google Chrome and Firefox. All of these different ones here will add into it. A big one is using an ad blocker. So again, this is going to basically stop any ads from being populated on the web page that you're visiting, which a lot of times is going to increase the speed of that website just because it doesn't have to load all those ads, which bog it down after a while. And then HTTPS everywhere. So we kind of touched on that previously. HTTPS is actually an encrypted version where HTTP is not. So if I'm going to go to a login page and it doesn't show HTTPS, I would be very, very cautious because you're basically going to send that clear text email and password to that website to authenticate. So this is where HTTPS everywhere tries to force the use of encryption when you're connecting on those sites if they don't have it already. Another big one is Privacy Badger. So this is from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it tries to block any trackers that are used on those websites. So again, Google is one of the bigger ones as far as trackers, to where they keep track of all the websites that you're visiting, then can use that information for analytics and also resell it to marketers and everything. So this tries to prevent those from happening. uBlock Origin is kind of a one-stop shop as far as ad block and privacy or tracker blocking, and also tries to prevent you from opening malicious known sites as well. And then there's DuckDuckGo Privacy Essentials. Like I mentioned, I use the DuckDuckGo search engine, but the Privacy Essentials is an add-on that will actually give you a rating for each site that you visit based on their security standpoint. So I know for a fact that if I go to like Gmail, they give it a privacy rating of D because there's a lot of bad privacy habits that are in place with Google as far as using those trackers and analytics and everything. But then if I go and visit another site, usually you'll see like a B+ or a B or something because they're using some form of encryption and they're not like tracking all your usage. Another very popular tool we see is password managers. So again, studies have shown that most people are using the same passwords, so like 5 or so on all their sites, which is a big deal because in these data breaches, if I, see that somebody had their LinkedIn credentials leaked, the first thing that these attackers are going to do is they're going to use those credentials and go try it on all the most popular sites, so Facebook and Amazon and Gmail, and hopefully gain access using just those credentials. A password manager, what it does is it kind of manages all your passwords for you. So what you do is you create one master password, and it can be whatever you want, just something that you'll remember. And then from then on, when I log into different sites or sign up for other sites, what I will do is create a new password that these password managers will remember for me, so that I don't have to keep track of all of them. I have just one password I need to remember. So the next time I visit like Facebook.com, I'll click on one of these browser extensions and it adds it right into the website for me, so I can click login right away. And it also works on iPhone and Android as well, so that way I can just open up the website and press like the password button and it'll fill in my information. So it's just very helpful in trying to keep track of all your passwords. They used to say that a secure password would be something like you see in the top here, where it's got a bunch of just random numbers and symbols. They've kind of changed their stance on that, where they say that, you know, adding this kind of like messy gobbledygook of letters and numbers and symbols doesn't really make it more complex. They found that length adds a lot of complexity. And I talked to one user who said that he uses music lyrics as a password, which is actually a very good idea, because you can think, you know, if I type one line of a music lyric, it's probably going to be like 36, 40, 50 characters long, but it's not something I'm going to forget very easily. So that's actually a very, very good password as far as complexity. And another big thing is using some form of multi-factor authentication. So again, should your credentials get leaked, you know, even if, you know, somebody did find out that you're using, you know, music lyrics for a password and they gain access to your account, if I was using some form of multi-factor authentication, I could stop them from even accessing my account, even if they know the email and password. And what this does is, you know, I would go to a site, use my email and password to sign in, and after that, it would provide, you know, another login screen saying, hey, please provide, you know, a PIN, or please, you know, authenticate the login from this location. And you can see there's a few examples here with Authy and Google Authenticator that provide a PIN that you would have to enter in. So I would just type that number. And most times, you know, I would have this on my phone or something that would enter in. Or then there's Duo here too that pops up, and it basically says, do you approve or deny this login? And it gives a location and IP address where they're trying to access it. So if somebody did have my information, even though they're trying to log into that account, I could stop them altogether from getting access by, you know, using one of these multi-factor authentications. And the last thing I would suggest is using some form of AI-based antivirus. So the way antiviruses worked in the past and still work now is they use what we call like a dictionary of different viruses that they've seen. So again, you think, you know, if I have a file and it's a known virus, what the antivirus is doing is it's looking at the, you know, code of that file or that program, and if it matches something that it already knows is a bad virus or malicious virus, then it'll just stop it from running altogether. The problem is Cisco did a study in 2017 and found that about 90% of all the antiviruses that were seen in the wild were less than 24 hours old. This means that, you know, these antivirus programs, they're never going to be able to keep up, because by the time these viruses are infecting people, you know, they haven't had a time or a chance to create a signature for it yet, so they're not going to be able to help prevent it. That's why, you know, AI is becoming such a big thing. We're turning to that now to help with security. And what the AI-based antivirus does is, if you try to open a file or launch a program, what it's going to do is kind of like either sandbox it or look at, you know, what is it trying to do on the computer before we open it. So if we see that it's trying to launch a command prompt and then, you know, escalate itself to an admin user and then run all these commands that, you know, this person wouldn't normally do, then that's kind of a red flag, and it'll stop it from happening. And then, you know, maybe you have to like type in a password again before you can actually allow something like that to happen. But again, it's just trying to monitor like the behavior of these programs and stuff, instead of just kind of letting it run because it doesn't match a signature or a dictionary file. So that is all I have. Again, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the discussion board now. We'll kind of run through those here. Otherwise, I appreciate your time. Jump over to my screen here for if we have any questions. I know that there is a little bit of a delay with this new program, to where I think it's like a 10 or 15-second delay between me talking and you guys hearing it. So again, I'll wait a little bit here to see if I can hear any questions from you. So otherwise, if there are no questions, again, you know, Sierra had mentioned you can send your questions to info@biztechnologysolutions.com. And also, you know, I have my email posted up here on the slide, so feel free to send any questions to us. We really appreciate your time and logging in and listening to us. Thank you very much.